The nobility was the backbone of the medieval state. It seems like a recurring theme in history for a country to be ruled by a minority of landowning men or bureaucrats. What is relatively rare, however, is those men having a completely different culture and language from the vast majority of their subjects. This of course was often the case in most large multi-ethnic empires. However, those states often had a heartland in which both the aristocracy and everyday people had the same cultural identity. What I'll be talking about today is something entirely different. Historical political entities in which the ruling elite was exclusively from a different ethnic background from their subjects. This video is brought to you with the generous support of my patrons, whose names you can see here. If you wish to help me dedicate more time, effort and resources to this channel, you can support me on Patreon with a small monthly donation of as little as $1. Now back to the video. The tribes of the European steppe were one of the most effective conquerors in history. From the 4th century onwards, this region would be dominated by various groups who made their way into Europe from their homeland in Central Asia. This process started with the migration of the Huns and the subsequent establishment of their empire. It is here where an interesting tendency common to many of the nomadic empires would first emerge. The Huns were but a tiny drop in the river of people that they came to rule, acting essentially as a warrior nobility that extracted tribute from their many subjects. One other such extreme case was the Other Cognate. A century after the collapse of the Turkic Empire, a small group of several tens of thousands of nomads entered the region near the frontier of the Eastern Roman Empire. These people were called the Avars and were fleeing from the encroaching empire of the Turkic Cognate. Under their leader Bayan, the Avars would eventually subjugate a vast area of land. They would conquer the Germanic Gepids by allying themselves with the Lombards, and after the latter migrated to Italy, the Avars would occupy their territory as well. And so this small group of Central Asian tribes had come to control a massive area populated by millions of Slavic, Germanic and other nomadic groups. Establishing a base in the Pannonian Basin, the Avars would use the vast disunity between the local native populations to control them. In the following decades, these nomads would launch several plundering expeditions into the territory of the Eastern Roman Empire, reaching as far as the city of Thessaloniki and even laying a failed siege on Constantinople together with the Sassanid Empire in the year 626. From then onwards, the grip of the Avars on their subjects would gradually begin to loosen. The local Slavic tribes would often rebel against the unfair treatment they received from their nomadic overlords. In the meantime, other groups, most prominently the Bulgars, would gradually begin seceding from Avar control. The death blow for the Pannonian nomads would come in the 790s. Following a destructive campaign in their land led by Charles the Great, the Other Cognate would essentially be reduced to a rump state that would be conquered a decade later by the Bulgarian Empire. Next on our list is the predecessor of the Eastern Slavic nations, Keavan Rus. Interestingly enough, it is not the Slavs who founded that state, but the Norse settlers in the region were also called Varangians by the locals. While most of the Viking raiders from Norway and Denmark sailed west, the ones from Sweden turned eastwards, sailing along the Baltic Sea, eventually navigating the large rivers of Eastern Europe and even entering the Black Sea. The fierce warriors of Scandinavia quickly came to dominate over the local Slavic and Finnic tribes, despite being massively outnumbered by those groups. According to the foundation myth of Keavan Rus, in time these subject people would rebel and expel their Varangian rulers. However, without the strong unifying crew of the Norse, the local Slavs would be quick to take arms against one another. Eventually, in an attempt to escape the vast disunity and uncertainty, the Slavs would invite the Norse to return and reclaim their role as rulers over the lands of the Eastern Slavs. Eventually, a Norse nobleman named Rurik would consolidate his rule over the major city of Novgorod in northern Russia. He would then expand southwards, conquering the trade city of Kiev, which would eventually become the capital of his state. And thus the Keavan Rus was founded. The Norse ruling elite of the region would be quick to adopt the local customs and language. Likely by the rule of Prince Sviatoslav in the 10th century, the Rurikids and the other Norse nobles resembled their Slavic subjects more than they did their Scandinavian kinsmen. The last elements of Norse culture would diminish with the Christianization of the Rus under Vladimir the Great in the beginning of the 11th century. However, the ancestors of Rurik would continue ruling Russia until the 16th century. Now let's go a couple of centuries back in time. Many of the Germanic kingdoms founded in the place of the Western Roman Empire were controlled by a tiny minority of Germanic nobles. Such, for example, was the case with Visigothic Spain, Vandal Africa and Ostrogothic Italy, where the actual Goths and Vandals numbered in the thousands while ruling over millions of mostly Latin-speaking people. The nobility in these kingdoms wasn't exclusively Germanic, however. A lot of the land-owning aristocracy was still of Roman stock. In Ostrogothic Italy, for example, the power structures in Sicily and the southern parts of the peninsula had barely changed since Roman times. However, the Gothic elites often had a monopoly on the army, since the Italian nobility had been largely demilitarized ever since the fall of the Republic. The new Gothic masters of Italy and Spain often tried imitating the Roman Empire, keeping its political and cultural structures and even claiming to be its legitimate successors, much to the displeasure of the very much still existing eastern half of the Roman Empire. Unfortunately, Ostrogothic Italy did not exist long enough to see its Roman and Gothic identities blend, as the Italian peninsula was reclaimed by the Romans in the 6th century, only to be swiftly overrun by another Germanic people, the Lombards. The case was pretty much the same with the Vandal Kingdom of North Africa, which had made active attempts in preserving its Germanic identity and Aryan beliefs, often even enforcing it on its Roman subjects. However, the case was different in Visigothic Spain and Frankish-controlled Gaul, where the ruling Germanic elite quickly adopted the culture, language and Catholic beliefs of their Roman subjects. Interestingly enough, the Latin-speaking populations of France and Spain would eventually adopt the ethnonym of their Frankish and Gothic masters, something which had also occurred with the Rus, which we mentioned prior, and even with the people of my own country, but that is a topic for another video. Again, special thanks to my patrons and to all who stayed till the end. That was all from me, and I'll see you in the next video.